Really cool here. Thank you so much to Michael Ian Black for joining us here on UAP today. Of course, you know I'm actor, writer, comedian, and podcast host of his own podcast called Obscure. Michael, thanks so much for coming on here to UAP. This is great.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Stephen.
Yeah, of course. And so you and I have a mutual friend in Dan Harari. So I just want to give him a shout out real quick and connecting us. So I'm glad we were able to do this and bring you on here because I find it so fascinating with so many of the different topics when it comes to the UAP conversation, where it kind of spills over into Hollywood sometimes. And you're one of those people in that conversation where it has spilled over into the Hollywood scene. So, how much of that, do you see kind of behind the scenes where the conversation takes place? Is it a lot? Is it not as much?
Nearly zero.
Really?
Almost zero. However, I will say that I'm not really in the Hollywood community. I don't live there. I don't interact with a lot of show business people in my day-to-day life. But when I have talked about it on sets or wherever, most people have at best a passing familiarity with the topic. I would say like the level of interest and knowledge in the Hollywood community is probably roughly equivalent to the knowledge people have in any community other than say the military. But yeah, I mean, it's some people are interested, some people aren't.
Do you think there's a stigma at all? Kind of like, just in everyday society where other actors or comedians might not want to talk about it because there's that stigma, like people feel like I'm going to be crazy, or is it just kind of just not really a thing as much?
Well, the good thing about actors and comedians, sometimes to a fault, is that I think we tend to be a little bit more open-minded about all subjects. So, for example, like, there'll be a lot of actresses in particular who are like into astrology. And I'm like, okay, but, I think you're full of shit. There's a lot of new agey people in that community, but that doesn't necessarily equate to UFOs or anything like that. In terms of stigma, no, I don't think there's a stigma. And in fact, I would say like in my day-to-day life, when I talk about this, I don't really sense any pushback. For the most part, I feel like the topic has become so mainstreamed over the last few years that people are at least vaguely aware that the topic is kind of in the ether, and so are maybe more willing to engage than they would have been, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've noticed that too, right? Even with just coming out with this show over the past few years of where the conversation started when it started 3 years ago to now, it feels like it's a lot more open. It's in the news more. Is that kind of what led you down the path of becoming interested in this? Or is that something that this is something you've been really intrigued by for a long time?
I've been interested in it for as long as I can remember. I mean, ever since childhood. I mean, I distinctly remember having two kind of nearly identical UFO dreams when I was like 4. So this would have been pre-Star Wars, pre-Close Encounters. So yeah, it's just something I've always been fascinated with and by.
So that's really interesting because you talk about having dreams at a young age about this topic, and you weren't influenced by things like Star Wars and Close Encounters. So where do you think that came from? I mean, do you think that was more than a dream, or was it just something kind of maybe popped into your head?
So I'm going to say I think it was just a dream.
Are you sure? Because you don't sound sure.
I think that it is curious that I would have those dreams and remember them so specifically, and the fact that they were nearly identical. I had them twice. They were nearly identical. The fact that I still remember them to me is a curiosity, but I'm definitely not willing to go beyond that.
So the reason I ask that is because, and I definitely respect where you're coming from on that. So by all means, but I can't help but to be intrigued by that because I always hear so many different stories, just like I'm sure you have, about abduction cases where it might come across as a dream. It always happens at an early age. In fact, I spoke to Snooki from Jersey Shore. She was on here a few months ago. She's great. So shout out to her. She's a fan of the show. And I was blown away when I spoke to her because she told her own abduction story.
Really?
And she had never told it before. And she told it as kind of just like what you were saying. She had a dream as a child. She was around 9 or 10 years old. and she remembers being on this ship surrounded by aliens, and they put something in her back. And then she like shot up out of the dream, she says. And when she woke up, she could actually feel something at the base of her spine. And to this day, she showed me the picture. You could see there's still a mark there. So when you talk about having that dream, I started wondering, I'm like, wait a minute. Did Michael Ian Black have a similar experience at a young age?
Well, look, I've asked myself that question and can come up with absolutely zero evidence to suggest that it was anything more than a dream.
Fair enough. Have you ever considered regression therapy? Or have you ever spoken to anybody who's gone through that before?
I've thought about it, but I have never pursued it.
See this now I'm going down a rabbit hole with your story because I wasn't expecting like I'm so intrigued by this now. I'm like, holy cow, this you might have had a real experience here. But because of that, this really kind of led you down the path of always being interested in the subject.
Well, so even then, my memory is, and my obviously memories are fallible, particularly at that age. Even then, I remember feeling like that this was a kind of it wasn't such an unfamiliar topic to me. You know what I mean? Like even then, when I was having that dream, like I was aware kind of what I was looking at. So it must have been I must have been aware of sort of the pop culture of it
Hmm.
at an early age. But yeah, that's as far as I'm even willing to speculate. I mean, as far as I know, no, nothing like that has ever happened to me.
Because you don't remember anything else since then. I mean, or have you had any other like, vivid dreams about this
No,
since that, or just that one time?
no. Well, it was two times, and they were
Two
close.
times, right?
They were relatively close together chronologically, but not since then.
What do you make of the connection? And I've been kind of investigating this when it comes to, abduction cases or dreams of like this. The connection to visions of animals, owls specifically. Have you come across stuff like that just in your own
Well, in
time?
my reading, sure, of course. I mean, I just read Mike McClellan's book. I might be getting his name wrong. Oh shoot, what is it called? I literally just read it. But he writes about owls all the time, and the way synchronicities seem to be connected to owls. And Darren from Exo Demick was talking about this, like the synchronicity storm that he had that involved owls. Whitley Strieber obviously talks about
Right.
owls. I don't understand what the connection to owls is. I mean, I know people speculate that it's some sort of masking filter. Um, I don't know. I
And
have
it's
no experience with owls.
it's good to know. So no owls in the dreams of Michael Ian Black then.
No, no
Okay.
owls.
Do you remember real quick, last thing on this because I'm just so fascinated by it. Do you remember what you saw in that dream? I mean, as far as
At
figures,
this
beings, and
point,
things like that?
only vaguely. So I was living in Illinois. That's how I know of my age, because I remember sort of where we were living. And I'd left there by the time I was 5. And I know that we're living in a townhouse, and behind the townhouse was sort of like almost like a gully, but like planted with grass and stuff. And I remember that the dream took place there,
Hmm.
and there was some sort of craft on the ground. I think it was saucer shaped. And in my memory, there were beings, um, and I feel like they were small. But again, like memory's so fallible that it's hard for me to give you a much better description than that. And I felt like I was observing it, but wasn't like a part of it necessarily.
Hmm.
Um, and nearly the same exact dream recurred very shortly after that.
Really interesting. That's good stuff. Appreciate that. Um, Kind of going down a conspiracy theory.
I love a good conspiracy theory.
Yes, good, good. I'm right there with you because this is one that just kind of pops into my mind sometimes when I see, just as a consumer, right? When I see different movies or shows come out, whether it's Independence Day or even going back, with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the Alien movies, all these different things in pop culture. I can't help but to think sometimes that there's an element of we're telling you something, we're kind of slow dripping information because we know a little bit more than we're letting on here in Hollywood when it comes to different producers or directors or writers. Do you think there's anything like that going on or has been going on over the years where they're trying to give us little hints on things because there's some more information that they know behind the scenes?
Obviously, I've come across this idea before. And my best guess is no, in the direct way that you mean, meaning like, no, I don't think the CIA. I'll just use a hyperbolic example.
Sure.
No, I don't think the CIA is running a movie studio and sort of dripping information to the masses through popular entertainment. However, I do think that that Hollywood tends to reflect um, the sort of public gestalt, and when we see an increase in movies about aliens or alien invasions or the mysticism around aliens, like in Contact, I think that tends to be reflecting certain amorphous truths that exist in the culture.
Hmm.
I also think it's certainly possible that there are times when somebody, say Steven Spielberg, is making Close Encounters, for example. He does his research. Maybe he talks to people in the intelligence community and they give him some information that may or may not be true and may or may not be pertinent. I think those conversations happen. But no, I don't believe that there's anybody directing Hollywood to produce science fiction films for the purposes of slow disclosure.
So just to be clear, then Steven Spielberg and Michael Bay are not CIA operatives.
No, they're part of the Majestic 12.
Okay. I'm, I'm glad we can clear that up. Thank you very much. Also, kind of sticking on that subject, though, when it comes to like other actors and people in the industry, what do you think about the story of Kurt Russell going back to the Phoenix Lights 1997? He told the story. Forgive me, I think it was on Jimmy Kimmel. I forget which night show it was on, but he told the story about he apparently was the first one to call that in, flying
Mhm.
his plane and seeing the Phoenix Lights in 1997.
Well, I mean, it's cool that he was an eyewitness to that event. It's cool that he called it in. Um, I've never heard a satisfactory explanation for the Phoenix Lights. Um, obviously, thousands of people witnessed it, including Kurt Russell.
Mm,
Um, I've never heard anything that comes close to being a satisfying explanation for what that could have been, because
right.
the size of it is enormous, and it seems like the initial debunk was like, oh, it's flares. It wasn't flares.
No.
People saw this thing traveling horizontally across space, and it was massive. um I have no idea. I mean, I feel like that's one of the great cases.
I'm with you on that because I feel like when it comes to mass sightings, that's got to be one of the top ones. I mean,
Hmm.
you think about that, and like you said, the debunk of flares. There's just no way because flares eventually descend. They eventually kind of fizzle out. That, like you said, that was moving across the sky. The more and more it kept popping up. It was to this day, like you said, there's no real explanation for that. And you had, it was the governor of
Yeah.
Arizona, or was the mayor of, it was the governor, right, where he came out in the alien mask and they played a joke about it. But later on, I think just a few years ago, he said in an interview, he apologized for that because he saw it too, and he still has no explanation for it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, I understand. I don't understand actually his thinking at the time. I think it was faulty and bad. Fife Symington, I believe his name is.
Yes.
He later claimed I was just trying to like make sure the public wasn't panicked or whatever. But really, I think what was going on is the more obvious uh, answer, which is that he was worried about being ridiculed and he was worried about the stigma for himself personally. So even though he personally saw it, he decided to make fun of it as a kind of cover your own ass political move so that he wouldn't be, the target of ridicule and scorn.
Yeah, I know it's wild. See, again, right, going back to the stigma idea, right? And of course, stigma was a lot different in 1997 than
Mhm.
it is now because it has become more mainstream, more people are open to it.
Yeah, and the fact that he owned up to it later, I think
Right.
really indicates the way that the stigma has kind of dissipated over the last couple decades.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you make, and this is purely speculation, so, I mean, there's really no right answer to this, but what do you make of mass sightings, right? So we have Phoenix Lights, 1997. We have the mass sighting in Zimbabwe, the school children who saw the UFO essentially land, in the back of the school, and they all saw the beings. They all describe it the same way, and a lot of other different mass sightings. So 2 questions. Why do you think those happen, and why do you think they don't happen more?
Well, in terms of why they happen, it's because something appears and a bunch of people see it.
Hmm,
That would
fair
be
enough.
my best guess as to why they happen.
In the
As
simplest terms, yes.
as to why they don't happen more, I actually think that's a really good question. Part of it, I think, may have to do I mean, I think there's a lot of theories that could explain it. First is they may not want it to happen more. Um, the second is a lot of the earth is unpopulated by humans. So things that are happening in remote areas may not be seen, particularly over the water. Um, and other than that, I don't know.
It is
I wish they would happen more. I wish more people were seeing these things. Um, because the mass sightings tend to be, I think, really good evidence for something. It's one thing to have a single person with a single camcorder or a single witness or even a handful of witnesses. It's quite another to have thousands of people witnessing the same thing. Then again, we've seen a lot of mass sightings in the past that really haven't generated any particular movement towards disclosure or even particular public interest. I'm thinking of the sightings in Washington, D.C. in 1952.
right.
Mass sightings of something just hanging out in the Capitol where it wasn't supposed to be, where it legally wasn't allowed to be. Everybody saw it. It was well reported. The Air Force held a press conference about it, and then it just sort of went away. So I don't know. I don't know how persuasive, actually, as I think about it, mass sightings actually are because people have such a fixed worldview.
Mm,
Um, so when the Phoenix thing happens, people go, wow, that's really interesting and weird. And then they forget about it. But they don't take the next step and go, it's interesting and weird and it's true. And therefore, something is occurring that I don't understand. Once people get to that cognitive dissonance of I don't understand, I suspect most people are happy to sort of file it away in their unknown box in their brains and move on with their lives. And that's a perfectly viable thing to do, I think. Like most people are busy. They don't want to spend a lot of time going down the UFO rabbit hole because, as you and I both know, you will never escape from that rabbit hole.
that's correct, and it just gets deeper and deeper. You think you have
Oh,
something figured out, and then you're like, "Wait, now there's 10 other questions because I found this out."
that's right.
It's
It is the truest sort of rabbit hole. I mean,
yeah,
except that rabbit holes end. This is just a journey to the bottom of the earth. This is an infinite tunnel. It's a wormhole. I don't know
mm,
what the hell it is, but there is no end to it. And in fact, as you just said, the more that gets revealed, it doesn't solve anything. It just opens up a whole other panoply of questions.
yeah, it's so true, and, when it comes to things like that, because it kind of to your answer with the first question of why do we think it happens? See, my mind goes towards the conspiratorial where I think, well, it doesn't happen more because, like you said, maybe they don't, who's they, right? But maybe they don't want it to happen more, but maybe it does happen at all because they do want it to happen. I mean, do you think those are messages when we do have mass sightings? Is that, or am I going too off the rails
Well,
there?
I mean, I have to believe that if these craft are intelligently controlled, then we have to assume that they understand, at least in a vague way, the kind of geopolitics of this country, I mean, of this planet, sort of who's the dominant life form on this planet. And so they must be aware that if they show up in Phoenix in 1997, that dominant life form is going to look at it and wonder what the hell it is. They may not care, but my guess is they're at least aware of it.
Yeah, it's really interesting idea to consider, I think. So who knows when the next mass sighting will be? And I wonder if something like that does happen, who's going to talk about it? Will it be in front of Congress? So I wanted to
I
ask
mean, I
you.
think you can call the Tic Tac sightings. That's a mass sighting. I mean, you've got
Yeah.
all these sailors, you've got all this radar data, you've got you've got so much corroborative evidence. And then there's congressional testimony. And even that hasn't moved the needle particularly. I mean, yes, people are kind of aware of it. And yes, we hear rumblings that are going on in Congress and behind the scenes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it has progressed the conversation incrementally, but I wouldn't say it has risen as a topic to the top of the charts the way I want it to be discussed. And I understand why. There's a lot of pressing earthly problems that we have to deal with.
Right. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I was just about to ask you, what do you make of some of the things you've seen, as far as Congress is concerned? Do you find these, well, let me ask it this way. The first hearing, right? David Fravor, Mike, and Grush and Ryan Graves. Did you find that useful in the disclosure movement? And do you think a second one would be useful as well?
I found it incredibly useful for a number of reasons. First of all, the fact that they went under oath. And these are military guys going under oath. They don't take
Right.
that shit lightly.
Right.
These guys, I don't know how many military dudes I've known many in my life, and they mean it.
Mhm.
None of those guys, no commander, naval commander, is going to get up in front of Congress and lie, unless it's like about a bribe that he took or something, but not about something like this. So it was incredibly useful to have all of that on the congressional record for a number of reasons. First of all, it just hearing them tell their story, I think for the public watching, very important. Having them do that under oath, very important. Having them be questioned by sometimes skeptical congresspeople, very important. How do they answer? Do they seem credible? Yes, they do. Very important. Grush's testimony is obviously the bombshell testimony.
Mm.
From everything that I know about Grush, he's a straight shooter. He's an incredibly straight arrow. There's 0% of me that believes that guy is in any way lying. However, that does not mean that he is in possession of the truth. I do think it's possible that, as Kirkpatrick said, that Grush's testimony is the result of kind of circular conversations happening within a small community of believers. I do think that's possible. However, I don't think it's probable. I think Grush and the people that he was in contact with, if Grush's testimony is to be believed, and I'm inclined to believe it until there's evidence to suggest I shouldn't. According to Grush's testimony, he spoke to firsthand witnesses. So unless 40 people were directly lying to Grush, people who didn't necessarily know each other or have some sort of coordinated agenda, then I don't understand why people wouldn't take that testimony seriously. It was incredibly important, compelling testimony from Grush.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I wanted to ask you, what do you make out of some of these whistleblowers, whether it's Grush or whether, have you heard of Jason Sands? I don't know.
Mhm.
So Jason Sands is someone that I've actually spoken to recently. I've had fortunate enough for him to reach out, and we've had a couple of conversations. Very fascinating guy. I personally believe what he's telling me just because of the conversations that we've had. And when it comes to Grush, he said basically that he's gave a lot of that information to Grush that we heard from Grush. Jason Sands being a firsthand witness, saying that he came across this alien in the desert by the Nellis Range. What do you make out of some of that stuff? I mean, do you think there's something there?
My instinct is always to believe that the person speaking is telling the truth as they understand it.
Hmm.
So somebody had an anomalous experience. They relay that anomalous experience to the best of their ability. And my inclination is to believe that they believe that. But because this is such a complicated, nuanced topic, I don't necessarily automatically agree with their conclusions about what happened or what they saw, nor do I necessarily believe that their memory, as my own memory is fallible, is infallible.
Hmm.
So in the case of Jason Sands, which I'm, familiar enough with, the answer is I don't know. I do believe that he had something happen to him. I do believe the events as he described them, at least in terms of the alien being that he encountered, I do believe that he believes he's telling the truth. Now, then you go to, he was making some sort of vague allusions to a 20 and back program that he was a part of. And you go, well, wait, well, hold on a second, because now you're going into now he's trying to claim that he was part of a program that there is no evidence that I've seen that it exists. There's certainly been theories about it. And so I take that with a massive grain of salt, not because I necessarily think he's lying in the sense that he's intentionally trying to deceive, but because I need way, way more before I'm willing to take him at his word on that.
Yeah, totally understood. I mean, who do you think is a name like Jason Sands someone that you would like to see on a second congressional hearing, or who do you think should be up there? Because this came up a few days ago. I was talking to some people, and I asked the question I posed. They said, "Would you be satisfied or disappointed with the same three names up on the stand, or do you think we need?" And I don't mean this in a bad way, but do you think we need new blood up there just because it would be repetitive otherwise?
It would be repetitive to have those three witnesses back in front of the committee, um, unless it was augmented with other witnesses and unless it was further augmented by better evidence than they were able to provide in their testimony.
Hmm.
It's very frustrating for people like me, lay people, who will listen to a Grush talk and he will be asked a specific question and he will say, I'll have to talk to you about that in a classified setting. So we understand why that might be necessary, but it doesn't, for the layperson and for the general public, unfortunately, it doesn't help the cause, because what is preventing so many people from being willing to embrace this narrative is the lack of physical evidence. So I do think it would be helpful to have, I don't know about Jason Sands specifically, I'm not opposed to it, but to have as many of those 40 whistleblowers that Grush says he spoke to in front of that committee with immunity protection, just spilling the beans. I'm just very dubious that will ever happen.
I know, we can only hope, right? I mean, what do you think? I guess a kind of a twofold question here, as far as what some of these Congress people actually know, right? As far as, are coming from a place of sincerity, whether it's a Jared Moskowitz or Tim Burchett, or even in the Senate with Marco Rubio and Chuck Schumer. And these are names that are on opposite sides of the aisle, right? We have Democrats and Republicans both with all those names. So, number one, do you think they're coming from a place of sincerity? And do you think that's what don't they know? I mean, are they really left in the dark here when it comes to this information?
Obviously, I don't know. I'm not a Washington insider. I'm not a politician. I have no idea. My speculation, as informed as it can be, which some people may say is not very informed at all, is this: Burchett, Luna, Moskowitz, and let's say Gates, I would expect are not as read in on this as Rubio and Schumer and Rounds, for the simple fact that they're not the House people that I just mentioned aren't nearly as senior, and don't have those kinds of high-ranking committee assignments. I don't think, I could be wrong about that, but I don't think. Whereas Rubio, Schumer, Rounds are part of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and Rounds and Schumer in particular, I believe, are in the Gang of Eight. So they are privy to the most highly sensitive US secrets. Again, I could be wrong about the details of some of this, so please don't hold me to it. What's particularly interesting to me about what happened in the last year, fascinating actually, was Schumer and Rounds' introduction of the UAP Disclosure Act, because in particular, Schumer, I didn't understand why Chuck Schumer, the arguably second most important Democrat in the country, maybe the third most, however you want to define it, why would that guy risk his reputation on a bill that talks about disclosure of non-human intelligence.
Mm,
Why would he do that? And is it possible for him to do that without the blessing of the White House? I have to believe the answer is no, because if there's nothing to this, it would make one of Biden's chief allies look like an utter fool.
mm,
So why the hell did they introduce this and fight for it so hard? He said it's because of his friendship with Harry Reid and that legacy. And I'm like, bullshit.
mm.
There's something more going on here. And Schumer and Rounds are trying to pry open that box lid. That to me was the most interesting story of the last year in terms of UFOs, was just the introduction of that amendment, which to me personally amounted to disclosure. That to me, that was soft disclosure.
That's a really good point. And even kind of going back to, mass sightings, like that in its own kind of way was almost like a mass sighting, because for every reason you just said, when it comes to Chuck Schumer standing and everything that he has to lose by coming out for an amendment like that in the NDAA, it was almost like that, oh shoot moment where people see that in the news. It was a big story. And they all have the same reaction, like you
But
just
it
said.
wasn't a big story. That's the thing. It
It
was a
should
big
have been.
story in the
Right.
UFO community. Like everybody was talking about in the UFO world, but in the
Yeah.
mainstream world, nobody was interested. In fact, when it was being killed, when it was in the process of being killed, I texted with a very well-known journalist to pay attention to this, to try to cover it. And that very well-known journalist could not have been more condescending
Oh
to
no.
me. Not in a mean way. He's a very nice person,
Yes.
but was like, yeah, okay, Michael, sure, you got it, Michael. Like the stigma was very present in that person's forehead. But to me, it's like, to me and to you and to everybody else in this community, it's a massive story. To people outside of this community, it didn't register at all.
It's a good point, right? Because I think you're right. When I say big story, I'm thinking in terms we're kind of like insulated,
Oh
right?
yeah,
In this community. And when you have something come out in the news, like even within the past couple of weeks, Dr. Michael Masters from Harvard, that made kind of the national headlines when he has the paper come out, aliens amongst us. But when it comes to the Schumer Amendment, yeah, why do you think that is? What do you think the reasons are? And this is kind of a complex question that keeps disclosure kind of in the, down in the belly? Is it more than one reason? Is it religion? Is it, government contracts? Is it because of crimes over the past 80 years? One of those, all the above. Like what do you see from all
I
this?
think it's all of the above. I mean, I think it's everything. It's whatever that CIA report was in the 50s, basically saying discredit anybody who believes this stuff. And it's trickled down since then. The evidence for the existence of something is overwhelming and voluminous. I don't even think there's any debate about that anymore. Like I've totally moved on from the are UFOs real question. To me, that question is now settled. But the conversation in the mainstream continues to be unable to move past that question.
Mm,
And so we're still in the mindset of are flying saucers real? And I think that's deliberate as well in terms of people trying to slow down disclosure, which at this point to me feels inevitable. I mean, I think actual disclosure, capital D disclosure, sort of feels inevitable. The nature of that disclosure, I think, is still very much up in the air. So in some ways, we've already had disclosure. So Kirkpatrick, for example, says there's no evidence of any extraterrestrial, blah, blah, blah. But then in the next breath says, but we've got these orbs flying over Mosul and all over the planet. Nobody understands what the hell they are. Okay, well, so what are you saying, bro?
mm.
What are you saying? So is he saying there's no evidence of extraterrestrial technology, but we've got these orbs, dot, dot, dot. These orbs aren't extraterrestrial, but they're also not the technology of any known nation. What are you saying? And I think disclosure is kind of going to happen like that, sort of piecemeal, this thing, that thing, that thing, the other. I do not anticipate, although I hope I'm wrong, anybody getting up in front of the cameras, any world leader or collection of world leaders, which would be ideal, to
Hmm.
get up in front of microphones and say, we're making a joint statement. We're aware of these craft. We don't know what they are. They're not ours. They're not anybody else's. We've determined that they are the construction of some sort of non-human intelligence. I don't anticipate that happening anytime soon.
It's a great segue actually to my next question, because I was just about to say, what do you think disclosure would look like, right? I mean, I think it's different to everybody. The word disclosure, it means a lot of things. It's very layered. So what do you think it would look like? What is that moment that would be satisfactory enough to the UFO community where we could say it's finally happened?
So capital D disclosure, I think, would mean that it was literally the president getting up and saying aliens are real, or non-human intelligence is real. Let's call it that. That's what I think the UFO community wants in terms of capital D disclosure. And we all know the problems with that. We all understand that once you say those words, once a president of the United States, or the Secretary General of the UN or whatever, once somebody says those words, the game has now changed for the planet. And the repercussions of it, although it has been studied a lot, I think remain unknown. The sort of secondary effects, I think, are complicated in terms of, okay, so who's in possession of this stuff? Where does it come? Like, just all the questions that immediately arise from that statement
Mm.
so quickly overwhelm the global conversation that I just think it's so unlikely to happen because of all the sort of wild card variables that are going to be thrown into humanity once somebody makes that announcement, which is why I think we're experiencing that kind of lower D, slow disclosure of drips and drabs, drips and drabs, drips and drabs. For me, disclosure's already happened. Like for me, with the introduction of Schumer and Rounds' bill, that's disclosure to me. That's them basically saying, yeah, there's something out there. We think it's some sort of non-human intelligence. We don't know what it is. It may be in the hands of private contractors, but there's something to this. We need to understand it better. To me, that was disclosure. The more formal disclosure, I don't anticipate ever happening,
Hmm.
unless some external force makes it impossible for it not to happen. For example, an Independence Day scenario, which
Right.
I also don't anticipate happening.
So Will Smith and Randy Quaid aren't going to be flying up into the air to save us from aliens. You don't see that one?
Oh, no. If disclosure happens, I fully expect Will Smith and Randy Quaid to save us. Don't misunderstand.
That's perfect. That makes me feel better. Um, what is and a few more minutes here, Michael. I really appreciate you spending all this time here on UAP today. I really enjoyed this. Um, what is one of the things that kind of like sticks in your mind, right? If you're doing your podcast, right? If you're on Obscure and you're talking about these things, what's one of the main questions you end up asking yourself or just in a conversation when it comes to this topic?
So for me, and I think for a lot of people in this community, the actual nuts and bolts UFO is the least compelling part of this story. In a very, like, I almost don't care about the craft. What I care about is what the existence of these things tells us about our own history, about the nature of reality, about the larger phenomena and how it relates to UFOs, and then all the sort of esoteric related questions or seemingly related questions, things that overlap with this community, things like near-death experiences, things
Mm.
like paranormal experiences, psychic experiences, like all of that. I should have said supernatural and then paranormal. Um, all of those things to me, in the way they tie into this topic and the way all of that connects to human consciousness, to me, that's the story. Like, yes, if there are extraterrestrials, for example, yeah, I definitely want to know where they came from. I definitely want to know what the state of their technology is. I definitely want to know about their culture. But I'm much more interested in how it relates to the human experience, how it relates to who we are, how we perceive the world, and what larger truths does the existence of these non-human intelligences reveal about reality itself?
Very deep. It's good stuff. See,
Oh, I'm so smart, bro. So smart, bro.
don't let anybody tell you anything different, Michael.
Believe me, plenty of people will tell you differently.
I want to get you out of here on this. Well, kind of like two questions. What's your favorite story? And by favorite, I mean someone comes up to you, you're at a show or something like that, and someone says, convince me of aliens, Michael. Why do you think it's real? So, what story would you give them? And then, have you heard Billy Corgan's story that he told on Howard Stern?
No, I've never heard Billy Corgan's story, so I'll look that up after this. In
Oh, I'll
terms of
tell you. Don't worry.
in
I'll
terms
trust
of best evidence that I would tell somebody who is a disbeliever, I wouldn't necessarily point to any one story because they can all be picked apart in any number of ways you want to pick them apart. Sometimes well, and sometimes they're picked apart badly. But what I would say to somebody who says, well, wait a minute, what the hell are you talking about? I would say, please refer to the US government's own statements on this topic going back to 2017 when they admitted to the New York Times that UFOs are real and they don't know what they are. I mean, that to me seems like the best evidence that the government itself, after decades and decades of denying it, is now admitting that this is a phenomena that we don't understand. And then from there, you can look at the Tic Tac and the Go Fast and everything else. And you could start looking at Grush. I actually wouldn't even have them look at Grush at first because I think that might be a bridge too far for some people. But then if they're interested, if they're further interested, I would say look at all the popular cases. Look at Roswell. Look at Phoenix. Look at the one in Brazil. You know, there's so many good cases that you can point to that, at the very least, at the very very least, I think prove that there is technology out there in our skies and under our seas that we do not understand, and it is actual technology. This is not natural phenomena. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, and to your point, that's verbiage that's been used by the Pentagon.
Yeah.
So it's out there.
So is it possible the Pentagon is lying? Sure. I can see no obvious explanation for why they would. And I know that some people are like, well, they just want to get more money for the Pentagon. And I'm like, that is maybe the dumbest argument I've ever heard, only because the Pentagon has so much money.
Yes.
They don't need to invent UFOs to get more money. Literally, they're drowning in money. They're fine.
Right.
Congress has sometimes apportioned them more money than they've even asked for. They don't need to concoct UFOs to get more money. They're saying it because it's true. They're saying it because they can no longer deny the corroborating evidence.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And by the way, Billy Corgan told Howard Stern that he slept with a shapeshifter by accident.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you
At
got
what,
it's
at what point did the person
um
shape shift?
I suppose after the act is kind of what he ended up telling Howard Stern. He didn't go through the whole story. I
Mhm.
don't know if you know Billy Corgan at all, and you can ask
I've
him
never
about
met him.
it. Okay. But
I slept with this chick, and after we were done, she grew a dick. Like, to me, that's not shape shifting, Billy. To me, that's something else entirely. I don't know. I
it's
looked up. Suddenly, she had a dick.
it's a different type of shape-shifting, yes. And to be fair, he said he was not high or anything because Stern asked him that question. He said, but yeah, just something that happened. He didn't go into the whole story. He said it was disturbing, but apparently he told Stern off the air. It's wild. I would
Well,
love
the
to.
thing is, the underappreciated aspect to all of this, I think, is that so many people, I don't know how many, but I'm going to guess it's the majority of us, have anomalous experiences in our lives that make no rational sense, no matter how often we run them through our brains and try to make sense of them in some way that would cohere with the reality as we understand it. Many, many, many people have these experiences, whether it's a ghost or it's Bigfoot or it's a shapeshifter or it's something appearing out of thin air, or something moving off a bookshelf for no reason, or lights flickering. Like, and in a lot of cases, you can go, well, there's probably a physical explanation for that. And to that, I would agree. There probably are in a lot of these cases, but not all.
Hmm.
Certainly not all. And the anomalous, I would say, is a feature of human life. Um, the world, the more I get to understand it, is an incredibly mystifying place. And when I say the world, I mean everything, the universe, or universe is. It's a mystifying place. And every time we think we have it figured it out, something comes along and slaps us in the head and says, no, you fucking idiot, you don't know a thing. Dark energy and dark matter are the best examples of that in recent years. We don't know what 85 or 90% of the universe is made of
Hmm.
after all this time. So the idea that our version of reality comports with capital R reality, to me, is probably incorrect. And if our vision of reality and understanding of reality is incomplete and incorrect, then I think we have to allow that there may be reasons that these anomalous things keep happening to people. People are experiencing all kinds of bizarre, inexplicable events in their lives. What are those? How do we understand them? Unfortunately, most of the time, they're not replicable. So you can't study them in the way that science would prefer to study them. But when we take the totality of these experiences across centuries, millennia, I have to come to the conclusion that not all of these people are lying, and not all of these people are crazy, and not all of these events can easily be explained. That's the mystery. That's what continues to fascinate me in this topic.
That's a great point. It's really well said to kind of put a cap on it, because I think that is one of the most important points, is to kind of say not everybody has all the answers. Some people might have an answer to this, another person might have an answer to that. But I think the most important thing to remember in this discussion, as you know, UFO community and really as society as a whole, is that not one person has all the answers to all these questions. And I think
No.
it's important to keep that in mind even for ourselves. When someone does say, "Oh, well, that's this and that's that," it's like, well, and that's one way or the other, right? You might have someone completely write something off. You might have somebody say, "Well, this is obviously that." So I think it is. I think you're right. It's always important to remember that we don't have everything. Like there's pieces to the puzzle that we're trying to figure out.
I would say we have, at least in the public, almost nothing at this
Hmm.
point. We really don't know what we're looking at. We really don't know what we're experiencing. We don't know in any meaningful way, which is why I'm so heartened to hear people like, oh, Gary Nolan and others talking about formalizing the study of this topic into at the college level and beyond. Let's have UAP studies be a credible college major, and let's have degrees in it, and let's have masters and doctorates in it. Let's really get our handle around this thing in a formalized manner, so that the study of it can be cohered and formalized and rigorous in a way that it really can't be when it's just dudes talking on Twitter. You know, it's very frustrating for me to read various UFO commentators, because they're all over the map. Everybody's in such a different place on this topic, and people will throw out assertions as if they're true when they're just not, when they're just speculation. So, for example, people will talk about the difference between the grays and the reptiles and the manatids and the tall whites. Okay, I believe that some people are experiencing those different entities. But I don't think collectively we're at a place where we can just assume that those things are quote unquote real in the way that we mean
Hmm.
when we talk about reality. Um, there's a disconnect, I think, between where the sort of general public is and where the UFO community is. And while I have moved on from the UFO question, I have not moved on from the abduction question, which is to me one, sort of the next step. What is an abduction? What does it actually mean? What is actually happening? How are we supposed to interpret the reports of these beings who say things to the abductees that in many cases turn out not to be true, even a little bit? So what is it? What are they experiencing? And so for some in the UFO community to go, well, the grays are from here and the reptilians are from here and the mantis, I'm like, slow down, dude. Like, we haven't established that those things exist in the way that the world would commonly accept the definition of exist. So I'm pretty cautious about it. Like, I'm willing to entertain every theory. I'm willing to embrace very few theories.
Right. It means, this could be interdimensional. Like we
have no idea what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Man, I feel like we could probably go for another hour, but I won't do that to you. So maybe we can catch up another time here on UAP. This has been great. So I will get you out of here on this. I promise.
Yeah.
Last question. On a high note, I suppose, if you had to name one person, now I'm talking name names, somebody in your circle in Hollywood or behind the scenes comedians, anything on that circuit, someone is not a human. Who would you peg as non-human?
Oh, non-human?
Yeah. There's that many. You're going through.
There's a few that come. The one that immediately comes to mind is Trump's immigration dude, Stephen Miller.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
That guy's just a lizard. I mean, he's just a lizard. He's a lizard.
Weird. He might be a lizard person.
I don't even know if he's a lizard person. I think he's just a lizard.
It's a lizard, right? Now that would be disclosure. Stephen Miller comes out on the podium, unzips. There he is. Hey guys. That's great. Michael Ian Black, thanks so much for spending all this time here on UAP. It's been an awesome discussion. Really enjoy this. A lot of layers to this. And if people want to find you, all the different projects that you're in or you've been a part of and future projects, how do they find you?
Who cares? You can find me if you want me. My name's Michael Ian Black. Find me wherever you want.
Just in any of those spots. You can just type in Google, you'll come up. Are you going on tour anytime soon?
I'm sort of on tour right now. I mean, I go out, a couple weekends a month. But I try not to stay out on the road too much because I'm an old man and I get tired.
Fair enough. I understand that. You just want to stay home and sleep sometimes, watch TV. I get it. Michael, thanks so much for coming on here. And hopefully we can talk again soon. This has been a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.